For decades, Apple was the company people trusted to define what premium meant in technology, a brand you paid more for, but believed was simply better. Its products offered seamless design, intuitive software, and a cohesive ecosystem that justified higher prices. But recently, something began to feel off. Customers started noticing incremental price increases, subtle service shifts, and product updates that felt less transformative. iPhones launched with only minor upgrades, accessory costs climbed, and the line between innovation and merely expensive became harder to see. What began as small frustrations now fuels ongoing debates about whether Apple's pricing power is finally being tested. And it's not just customer perception. Global competition, rising costs, and economic pressures are squeezing the system Apple has built over decades. So what's really happening behind the scenes with Apple's premium pricing strategy?
The answer lies in decisions most consumers and investors rarely notice.
In this video, we reveal why Apple's premium pricing narrative is eroding and how that affects your choices as a buyer and investor. In the early 2000s, Apple positioned itself as more than just a computer company. It became the aspirational alternative to the commoditized, often confusing world of personal computers. Where PCs emphasized raw specifications and price competition, Apple promised simplicity, elegance, and reliability. The iMac, with its colorful, all-in-one design, and later the original iPhone, introduced an entirely new way of interacting with technology. Intuitive, cohesive, and unmistakably Apple. This seamless integration of hardware and software became the company's signature. MacBooks, iPhones, and iPads worked together effortlessly, while the operating systems felt familiar yet polished. For users, this meant fewer frustrations, fewer crashes, and a more predictable, enjoyable experience. The design choices were not purely aesthetic, they reinforced usability and reliability, making Apple products feel trustworthy in a market often defined by complexity and compromise. Beyond functionality, Apple carried emotional value. Owning an Apple product signaled something intangible: safety in the ecosystem, accessibility to user-friendly technology, and social cachet that transformed everyday devices into personal statements. People weren't just buying tools, they were buying reassurance that their technology would perform, endure, and connect them to a community of like-minded users. This combination of tangible performance and emotional reward justified Apple's premium pricing. Consumers were willing to pay more because the brand offered a promise that few competitors could match: superior experience, consistent quality, and the feeling that every purchase was a smart investment rather than a gamble. For years, this promise defined Apple's relationship with its users. The brand was trusted, admired, and rarely questioned. Paying extra didn't feel like overspending. It felt like acquiring certainty in a fast-moving, unpredictable technological world. Apple's early success was built on this alignment of value, trust, and aspiration, a foundation that would eventually face systemic pressures as the company scaled. Apple's influence has always extended far beyond its products. From modest beginnings in the 1980s, the company grew into a global powerhouse, commanding one of the largest market capitalizations in history. Its iPhone alone generates hundreds of billions in annual revenue, eclipsing the total earnings of many entire industries. This massive growth transformed Apple from a niche innovator into a dominant force that shapes technology markets worldwide. The company's global presence is unmatched. Apple operates retail stores in nearly every major market, distributes devices across dozens of countries, and maintains a complex supply chain spanning continents. Its ecosystem, connecting iPhones, iPads, MacBooks, watches, and services like iCloud and the App Store, creates a tightly controlled environment where Apple dictates the rules of engagement. Consumers, developers, and accessory manufacturers all navigate this system, giving Apple unique leverage over pricing, innovation, and product adoption. This scale gives Apple extraordinary pricing power. The brand can set price points that competitors often struggle to match, simply because its products are not easily replaceable within the ecosystem. Market expectations adjust around Apple's pricing decisions, influencing not only consumer behavior, but also industry standards. When Apple raises prices or introduces new features, competitors and customers respond, sometimes without realizing it. However, such scale also introduces complexity. Each Each decision, whether to adjust hardware specifications, tweak software features, or modify service fees, carries ripple effects across supply chains, investor expectations, and global markets. The larger the company becomes, the harder it is to maintain consistent pricing strategies that align with perceived value. Systemic pressures emerge. Rising costs, global competition, and ecosystem dependencies combine to subtly challenge Apple's long-standing premium pricing narrative. In short, Apple's growth and dominance are double-edged. Scale reinforces influence, but simultaneously amplifies the structural pressures that can undermine the very premium it once reliably commanded. Even the most trusted brands eventually face subtle shifts that go largely unnoticed at first. For Apple, these first cracks appeared gradually, often hidden within normal product cycles. Minor price increases on iPhones and accessories were barely reported, while incremental upgrades, slightly faster processors, marginal camera improvements, or minor design tweaks became the new norm. On their own, these changes seemed inconsequential, yet cumulatively, they quietly began to challenge the perception of Apple as a brand whose premium pricing was always justified. Inflation added another layer of pressure. While the nominal prices of flagship iPhones remained relatively stable, the real cost to consumers, adjusted for global inflation and currency fluctuations, subtly increased. In certain markets, Apple even had to make adjustments to meet government subsidies or regulatory requirements, creating small inconsistencies in pricing strategies that had long been uniform worldwide. Service changes contributed to the perception of erosion as well. Battery replacements, repair costs, and subscription-based software features became slightly more expensive, often without clear communication to the end user. Each adjustment was minor, but together they suggested a brand moving away from the consistency and reliability that had defined its reputation for years. These early indicators did not provoke immediate alarm. Analysts and consumers could rationalize them as ordinary adjustments in a growing global company. Yet the pattern was emerging. Incremental upgrades, subtle cost shifts, and uneven value perception combined to erode trust slowly. Online forums, media outlets, and tech commentators began to debate whether the premium Apple once demanded was still fully justified. By the time observers recognized the trend, it had already gained momentum. What seemed like isolated minor frustrations became systemic signals, early warnings that Apple's once untouchable pricing strategy was under pressure. The first cracks were small, almost invisible, but their accumulation set the stage for the broader challenges to come. Apple's premium pricing has always been tied to a simple promise. Each new product generation delivers clear innovation, tangible improvements, and experiences worth the higher cost. Historically, this formula held true. When the first iPhone launched, it redefined the smartphone category. Every subsequent generation introduced advancements that felt meaningful: faster processors, better cameras, and innovative features like Face ID or edge-to-edge displays. Consumers could justify paying a premium because the value was visible and tangible. In recent years, however, this dynamic has shifted. Product updates have become increasingly incremental. Cameras receive minor enhancements, processors are slightly faster, and software updates add small features rather than transformative changes. Each upgrade is real, carefully engineered, and functional, yet the perceived value does not match the price. Customers begin to question whether these incremental improvements truly merit the premium they are paying. Marketing efforts, once able to amplify the excitement of each new release, can no longer fully mask this perception gap. Sleek advertising campaigns highlight features and ecosystem integration, but consumers increasingly recognize the subtlety of the changes. The narrative that every Apple product is a groundbreaking leap is harder to maintain when the tangible differences between generations are small. This misalignment creates a psychological gap. Consumers continue to expect visible, transformative value in exchange for higher prices, but Apple's incrementalism fails to fully meet those expectations. Over time, the perception emerges that the premium may not be fully justified, even if the engineering work behind each device is solid. In essence, Apple faces a structural challenge. Its pricing is anchored in perceived innovation, but incremental product improvements cannot always sustain that perception. The gap between expectation and reality weakens the premium narrative, leaving the company vulnerable to scrutiny. What was once a clear justification for higher prices now requires careful management of perception, marketing, and customer understanding. Apple's pricing decisions are not determined solely by marketing strategy or brand positioning. Behind the scenes, the company faces complex economic pressures that shape what it can charge, how products are released, and when adjustments are necessary. Global inflation, rising labor costs, and logistical challenges steadily increase production expenses. Components sourced from multiple continents fluctuate in price due to currency volatility and regional economic conditions, creating constant cost uncertainty. Supply chain disruptions have also played a role. Even Apple's famously efficient logistics system cannot entirely eliminate the effects of natural disasters, port congestion, or regional shutdowns. Each of these factors adds pressure to maintain margins while ensuring product availability worldwide. Delays or shortages can force strategic decisions, sometimes prioritizing certain markets over others, which subtly affect pricing perception in different regions. Tariffs and regulatory requirements further complicate matters. In major markets such as China, the United States, and the European Union, import taxes, subsidy programs, and compliance costs can alter the economics of selling devices. Apple must navigate these regulations carefully, balancing the need to remain competitive with the necessity of maintaining the brand's premium image. In some cases, absorbing costs becomes necessary to avoid sticker shock, but doing so erodes profit margins. At the same time, the tightly controlled ecosystem, from the App Store to device interconnectivity, constrains flexibility. Price adjustments cannot be made in isolation, as they ripple through services, accessories, and software subscriptions. Raising prices too aggressively risks breaking the perception of Apple as a fair, premium brand. Holding prices steady, however, compresses margins under rising cost pressures. In short, Apple's pricing is influenced as much by external economic realities as internal strategy. The company operates within a delicate balance. It must manage inflation, supply chains, labor, tariffs, and ecosystem interdependencies, all while ensuring that the premium perception remains intact. These pressures illustrate why even incremental adjustments to pricing and product offerings carry significant consequences. Apple's premium pricing has always carried an implicit promise. When consumers pay more, they expect visible, meaningful breakthroughs. Whether it is a faster processor, a significantly improved camera, or a new design language, customers have come to associate the Apple name with tangible leaps in innovation. Over time, this expectation became deeply ingrained, a standard against which every new release is measured. In recent product cycles, however, Apple's improvements have become more incremental. Features are refined rather than revolutionary, and hardware updates often build subtly upon the previous generation rather than redefine it. While these enhancements are real and carefully engineered, the perceived impact on user experience does not always justify the premium price. The gap between what customers expect and what is delivered is growing, even as Apple continues to market each release as part of a seamless ecosystem. Importantly, neither side is wrong. Consumers reasonably expect that paying more should result in noticeable improvement, while Apple operates within a complex network of economic, supply chain, and production constraints that limit the pace of dramatic innovation. The mismatch is structural. Premium pricing relies on the perception of continual breakthroughs, while incremental innovation, by definition, cannot fully satisfy that perception. This structural tension creates friction. Customers debate value online, compare prices and features, and sometimes delay upgrades. Analysts highlight the subtle lag between price and perceived benefit. The expectation gap does not erupt as a crisis overnight, but it quietly undermines the trust and loyalty that once made Apple's premium pricing unquestionable. Over time, this gap becomes a key factor in understanding why Apple's pricing narrative is under stress, setting the stage for more visible challenges to come. Every premium brand faces a subtle but critical test: the moment when customers begin questioning whether the price truly matches the value. For Apple, this psychological tipping point is becoming increasingly visible. Incremental improvements in devices, paired with rising costs, force consumers to ask the question, is this worth it? It is no longer just about specifications or design, it is about perceived return on investment. When prices are compared in context, the tension becomes clearer. Inflation-adjusted figures show that flagship iPhones and MacBooks are effectively more expensive than previous generations in real terms. Competitors in the smartphone and laptop markets offer similar features at lower prices, sometimes including innovations that Apple has yet to adopt. Even older or refurbished Apple devices now compete with new devices from other brands, creating alternatives that complicate the perception of value. Consumer decisions increasingly hinge on these small differences. While the absolute cost may be justifiable for some, the incremental improvements, slightly faster processors, marginally improved cameras, or minor software enhancements, often fail to tip the scales in favor of an immediate upgrade. Gradually, a pattern emerges. Fewer users feel compelled to purchase the latest model immediately, and some begin delaying or skipping upgrades entirely. This is the point where perception and reality collide. The premium Apple brand no longer operates on unquestioned trust alone. Pricing, incremental improvements, and available alternatives converge to challenge the traditional narrative. When the price no longer clearly aligns with visible benefits, the decision to buy becomes more deliberate, more calculated, and less automatic. The value gap, though subtle at first, signals a deeper pressure point that Apple must navigate carefully, one that influences both consumer behavior and the broader market narrative. Apple's pricing pressures do not exist in isolation. Small shifts in perception can trigger a self-reinforcing cycle, a feedback loop that gradually undermines trust in the brand. It begins with consumers noticing incremental price increases and questioning the value of upgrades. When the perceived benefit no longer matches the cost, many users delay purchasing the latest devices or opt for older models. Slower sales, even marginally, create subtle pressures on Apple's revenue streams. While the company remains highly profitable, every delayed upgrade or deferred purchase slightly alters expected margins. These cost pressures ripple through the system, influencing decisions on pricing, production, and feature prioritization. To maintain profitability, Apple may implement incremental price adjustments or add minor features to justify charges, but these moves are carefully calibrated to avoid alienating the core customer base. Yet, each adjustment, no matter how small, feeds back into consumer perception. Buyers notice rising costs, subtle feature differences, or changes in service pricing. The incremental nature of these changes makes them seem small individually, but collectively, they create a sense that the premium Apple once commanded is eroding. Trust begins to weaken quietly, without dramatic outcry, but the effect is cumulative and systemic. This loop illustrates a fundamental vulnerability. The erosion of confidence is not caused by a single misstep, but by the interplay of multiple pressures: consumer expectations, pricing decisions, production constraints, and perceived value. The feedback loop transforms minor frustrations into a broader structural challenge. Apple's premium narrative, once unquestioned, becomes a fragile equilibrium, constantly tested by market forces and perception. The death spiral is subtle, gradual, and silent, yet it explains why even a company as dominant as Apple can face systemic pressures that threaten the long-term stability of its pricing power. For Apple, the most dangerous consequence of incremental pricing and product shifts is not overt backlash, it is quiet disengagement. Loyal users who once upgraded devices eagerly and without hesitation begin to reconsider their purchasing patterns. Comments like, "I only upgrade when necessary," or "I'm waiting to see if the next model is truly worth it," have become increasingly common in online forums and customer feedback channels. This subtle withdrawal signals a deeper challenge. Apple's brand strength has always relied on trust, the confidence that each new device will deliver tangible, meaningful improvements worth the premium. When that trust begins to erode, even slightly, the implications are significant. The emotional connection that once justified higher prices weakens, leaving consumers more deliberate, cautious, and skeptical. The impact is not immediately visible in revenue figures or market share, making it harder for observers to recognize the early signs of a crisis. Yet the slow, quiet erosion of trust creates a precarious foundation. Customers leave gradually, delaying upgrades, purchasing older models, or exploring alternatives, rather than abandoning the brand entirely. This makes the problem invisible but persistent, quietly undermining the premium narrative Apple has cultivated for decades. At this emotional low point, the brand's narrative faces its most subtle threat. Loyalty alone is no longer sufficient to sustain premium perception. The real crisis is psychological and structural. Without tangible breakthroughs that justify higher prices, even devoted customers become cautious participants, rather than enthusiastic advocates. As Apple's premium pricing faces subtle pressure, other players naturally capitalize on the opportunity. Competitors in the smartphone and computing markets, particularly Android manufacturers, have introduced devices with comparable features at lower price points. These alternatives appeal to users who are sensitive to incremental improvements versus cost, offering sufficient functionality without the premium markup. Secondhand and refurbished markets have also expanded. Older Apple devices, still fully functional, provide an accessible entry point for consumers reluctant to pay full price. These markets offer a practical solution for buyers who want the Apple ecosystem, but question the necessity of the latest model, creating a quiet but growing alternative channel. Subscription-based models and ecosystem alternatives further diversify choices. Cloud storage, software subscriptions, and accessory bundles allow consumers to access parts of Apple's ecosystem at lower cost, reducing the need for frequent hardware upgrades. Users can now engage with the brand in more flexible ways, diminishing reliance on flagship devices alone. The market adapts naturally. Where Apple's premium narrative shows signs of strain, competitors and alternative solutions step in to fill perceived gaps. This is neither dramatic nor confrontational. It is a structural shift that reflects broader consumer behavior, economic realities, and evolving expectations. The brand's dominance is challenged not through overt failure, but through market evolution, highlighting how even the strongest ecosystems are subject to subtle competitive pressures. Even amid subtle pressures on Apple's premium pricing, there are strategies consumers can use to navigate the ecosystem intelligently. Understanding where the value still exists and where it does not helps users make informed decisions without compromising experience. First, consider which purchases still justify the cost. Flagship iPhones, MacBooks, and iPads retain advantages in performance, build quality, and ecosystem integration. Devices that fully leverage Apple's software environment, such as iCloud, Handoff, or AirDrop, provide seamless experiences that competitors may struggle to replicate. For users invested in multiple Apple products, the convenience and integration often outweigh the incremental cost, making these purchases reasonable. Conversely, some upgrades may be worth avoiding. Minor annual iPhone updates, particularly those that offer only incremental improvements in performance or camera functionality, often fail to justify full-price investment. Similarly, MacBook iterations with minor hardware enhancements may not deliver sufficient value if the previous generation still meets your needs. Delaying upgrades by 1 or 2 cycles can provide substantial savings without meaningful compromise in usability. Practical approaches to interacting with Apple today include buying older or refurbished models. Certified refurbished devices offer near-new performance at reduced prices, preserving ecosystem benefits while minimizing expenditure. Monitoring seasonal sales or trade-in offers can also improve cost-effectiveness. Focusing on ecosystem integration can further maximize value. Rather than chasing every new device, prioritize features that connect seamlessly with existing products. Whether it's software subscriptions, accessories, or services like Apple Music and iCloud. This approach ensures that even older models remain useful and relevant. Finally, adopt a measured mindset. Evaluate purchases based on real functional gains rather than marketing narratives or perceived social status. By aligning decisions with actual value, consumers maintain access to Apple's ecosystem while avoiding unnecessary financial strain. In short, navigating Apple's ecosystem today requires discernment. Recognize what remains worth the premium, avoid upgrades with marginal improvements, and leverage older devices, sales, and ecosystem benefits to preserve value. These strategies transform subtle pricing pressures into manageable, intelligent choices for the modern consumer. Apple's story is one of evolution, not collapse. The company has grown into a global powerhouse, mastering innovation, ecosystem integration, and brand influence. Yet the dynamics of scale, cost pressures, and incremental product improvements have subtly altered the premium narrative. Apple is no longer a brand whose higher prices go unquestioned. The value proposition now requires careful consideration. This does not make the company bad, nor does it negate its achievements. Apple still produces high-quality devices, maintains a tightly integrated ecosystem, and offers experiences that few competitors can replicate. The change is structural and perceptual. Consumers now weigh upgrades more deliberately, comparing incremental improvements against cost and alternative options. Understanding this shift is essential for anyone navigating Apple's ecosystem intelligently. The story invites reflection and participation. How have these changes affected your own behavior as a consumer? Have you delayed upgrades, opted for refurbished models, or explored alternative platforms due to the price-value relationship? Your experiences reveal patterns that go beyond individual choice, helping to illuminate broader trends shaping one of the world's most influential technology companies. Apple's trajectory illustrates a broader lesson in premium markets. No brand remains immune to structural pressures, and perception plays as critical a role as product quality. By analyzing the forces at work, users gain insight into both the company and their own decision-making. Share your experience. Have you stopped upgrading due to the price-value mismatch, or do you continue to invest in the latest devices? Your perspective contributes to a fuller understanding of Apple's evolving narrative.